months behind. If you're here for the first time, please keep it to the content related within the director's cut. So with that, I have hit record this month, so we'll go ahead and get started, Mr. Helms.
You did hit record.
I did, yeah. I
Awesome.
tried to do that last month.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for coming to the Director's Cut webinar or tuning in. We're talking about February production, and it's really a pretty exciting number. I don't think anyone really expected production to go up 53,000 barrels a day. And so we broke back above 1 million barrels a day. And that was really anticipated much later this year. So I've titled this month's webinar, The Roller Coaster, because we really are riding a roller coaster of oil prices and activity and completions and weather and all of that. And of course, you know, a little bit of caution. Whenever the roller coaster is going up, what's the next thing that's coming? You're going to hit the top and probably have a little downturn. And so we don't know. But just to talk a little bit about that, natural gas production also up significantly, 148 million a day, up 9.5%. And so as we look at those numbers, what happened? One thing was that we had much better weather in February than we had in December and January. So due to confidence on the part of our operators, oil prices were above that $50 West Texas Intermediate number. So they had a high degree of confidence. We had some pretty good weather. We had frozen roads, and so they deployed a lot of completion crews. And we saw the non-completed well number fall below 800 for the first time since September of 2015. Well, actually since December of 2014. Let me correct that. The last time our non-completed well number was below 800 was December of 2014, so almost 3 years ago. It hit a high in September of 2015 of 1,091. So we're down about 300 non-completed wells from that high number. And so as we look forward in the near term, what are some, you know, kind of cautionary statements? We are under road restrictions now. The weather has warmed, the roads have thawed, and we'll be under road restrictions probably until early May. And so that's going to dampen activity a little bit. OPEC is going to meet May 30th, and they have to make a decision whether to extend the production cuts that they imposed in November. And in the middle of all of that, we've got a little spat going with Russia over Syria. And so if Russia and some of the other non-OPEC countries, in particular the U.S., aren't very cooperative, it's possible that OPEC could decide not to extend their production cuts, and we could see a downturn in oil prices for the second half of this year. Looking further out, though, and I've looked at the EIA production and demand balance projected out through the end of 2018, and even without an extension of OPEC cuts by the end of this year, demand and production are going to be in balance. So regardless of that, I mean, we may have a rough patch the second half of this year, but by the 1st of January of 2018, supply and demand should be in balance, and we should see some real support, some market support for oil prices. So good weather, a high degree of confidence on the part of our operators, frozen roads, and a lot of completion crews. So we had 74 new Bakken wells go online. We had 93 conventional wells returned to production to bring that number down, and added 1 rig in February, 7 in March, and 5 more for today. And so we're above 50 drilling rigs and have been for some time. One interesting statistic in that drilling rig thing is that Divide County fell to 0. There are 0 drilling rigs operating in Divide County, and that hasn't happened since 2008. So I have a little work to do to try to find out why that is. Divide County has almost always had 1 or 2 drilling rigs operating, and the southeast corner of Divide is pretty good in terms of production. But it must have something to do with roads and weather and production in Divide. But that's an interesting little turn of events to drop to zero. I talked about the non-completed wells. So first time that we've been under 800 since December of 2014, and we're down about 300 from the peak in September of 2015. Activity on Fort Berthold pretty much mirrored the rest of the state. No big changes there. Flaring, some good news. We're back below the target. In fact, we're 4 to 5% below the Industrial Commission targets, and we're even 1 to 2% below the next target, the upcoming target, which is November 1st of 2018. So gas capture in the Bakken hit 90%. Gas capture statewide hit 89%. When we look at the federal picture, things are really in flux. We have listed 8 different things that could impact or are impacting North Dakota. 5 of those have been directed by President Trump's executive order to be reversed or overturned by cabinet level secretaries within the EPA and the Department of Interior. So we're continuing to utilize legal counsel to make sure that we stay on track with all of those challenges. Like I said, there are 11 of them, but 5 of those are affected by Trump's executive order ordering cabinet level officials to reverse or stop the legal process on rules that were implemented under the previous administration. So that's our story for February. It is a real roller coaster ride. Oh, I should mention, what does this mean for the state revenue forecast? You know, the state just put together a revenue forecast and approved it last month. As we look out, typically the state would not do another revenue forecast until January of 2018. So I don't anticipate any kind of quick reaction to this increase in production. I expect that the revenue folks and the appropriations folks over there at the legislature will stay the course. But first of 2018, there will probably be another revenue forecast. And as the legislature has stated, they've left some room, built some contingencies into some budgets so that if the picture gets better quicker, they'll have an opportunity. They're even trying to leave some legislative days so they would have an opportunity to come back and make some corrections.
Okay.
Any questions?
Go ahead, Alyssa.
With the events that have taken place overseas, oil prices seem to have stayed pretty around $50 a barrel. What can you say is the reason behind that? Usually when a main event happens, they dip down pretty low.
Sure. So the question for those on the webinar was oil prices have remained pretty stable, irrespective of some pretty drastic events taking place overseas. The threats from North Korea, the incident in Syria, the dispute with Russia. And I think a lot of that has to do with the tremendous amount of shale production that the U.S. has. So we're now producing, again, about 9 million barrels a day in the U.S. and continue to have almost 5,000 uncompleted wells in the shale inventory nationwide. So the market recognizes that if there were an interruption because of these world events, shale wells would be able to fill that gap pretty quickly and pretty easily. Now, that's true until sometime next year, but sometime next year, we're expecting production and demand, or supply and demand, to be in balance, and we won't have that cushion. Now, you know, one of my concerns is that some of these problems, like in Syria or the disagreement with Russia, could result in the OPEC production cuts falling apart, and we could see a dip in prices in the second half of this year, and that might impact activity when it normally would have been very good. So, but the large amount of U.S. production and the large number, big inventory, almost 5,000 wells in inventory, tends to really stabilize those oil price markets. It's been a good thing for us.
Can you talk about road restrictions and just kind of explain when roads are frozen, what exactly that means, when they start to thaw, what that means?
Sure. So the question from the room here for those on the webinar was a little explanation on road restrictions and what that means, because it's unusual to have a producing state like North Dakota. Texas doesn't have road restrictions. Oklahoma doesn't. New Mexico doesn't. California doesn't. Alaska doesn't, because they don't have roads where the permafrost is. I mean, they built ice roads up there. So what happens in North Dakota starting around Halloween is that the weather gets very cold, and the soil here, road beds and the soil freeze down to 4 or 5 feet. And all of that, those road beds and that top 4 or 5 feet of the soil are frozen solid. So at that time, the roads, even prairie trails, can carry a 100,000-pound semi pretty easily. But beginning in March, the weather turns warm, the roads thaw out, and that top 4 or 5 feet of soil and the road beds become as much water as they are clay or gravel. And so the road support becomes very soft and the pavement breaks. And at that point, the counties and the State Department of Transportation restrict, they put severe weight limits on the trucks that can use the roads, usually in the neighborhood of 50 or 70,000 pounds. So if you're attempting to frack a well or move a drilling rig or even haul oil or produced water, it takes twice as many trucks between March and May. And so many times industry slows things way down, second half of March, all of April, and the first half of May, because they simply can't afford to double the number of trucks for what they're doing.
So do you expect, because of that, do you expect any sort of production drop over the next few months that you listed?
Yeah, I actually do. I was anticipating, honestly, a drop in February and got a surprise here. But I think we're going to ride the roller coaster down as much as up. And so I would not be surprised at all to see March flat or down from February, and April to be down. And then we'll probably pick back up in May, and certainly by June, July, and August, if oil prices hold, activity will be very aggressive.
How do you expect production numbers to look with Dakota Access added into the picture? Obviously, we have February production, so when that comes into the equation, how do you expect that to look?
So I hope they'll ask Justin that question as well. But Dakota Access, the key there is lower, stable transportation costs. And for some operators, it's $1 or $2 lower. For others, it's $5 or $6 lower, depending on how they were moving their crude oil and whether they were going to have to put incremental oil on rail or if they already had it in a pipeline. But in every case, it's lower and it's stable. So as they look into the future, they have a known transportation cost. It's not going to be highly variable depending on rail transportation to a coastal market somewhere. And that results in a lot more confidence in making investments. I talked to one CEO, company out of Denver, and he was comparing the Permian Basin, which has been very active through the winter. They don't have road restrictions or blizzards or -10, and so they've been very active through the winter. He was comparing the Permian to the Williston Basin, and he said the state production extraction taxes here are higher than in Texas. The royalty payments in Texas are much higher than they are here, and the transportation costs here were higher. But with Dakota Access, he believes it completely levels the playing field between North Dakota and Texas. So it takes the transportation cost difference out of the equation, and now we're just talking state tax rates and royalty rates, and they're pretty much equal. So in the long run, it will be very beneficial to our producers because they can have a stable, confident transportation cost, and lower, not just stable and confident, but lower than it's been.
I know there's more questions than that. That's all I have in the queue.
1 million barrels a day is a big deal.
With the roller coaster you mentioned, so we're near the top, we're gonna go back down. What are we looking at? You know, where are we looking at the bottom? Are we talking more like January production levels, lower? Where do you imagine that to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question was, where is the bottom of this next low spot on the roller coaster? Because we're kind of at a peak and expecting at best out of March flat and perhaps down, and April to be down. And so I think, you know, we're looking at something maybe similar to December production levels, 950,000, something like that as the low point. I know that the production forecast or the revenue forecast for the state is built around 925,000, and it's very unlikely that we'll hit that or go below that. So, you know, realistically, the low point of this next dip on the roller coaster ride is in the mid 900s.
How many months has it been that it's been below 1 million barrels a day? I haven't covered this in a while.
Do you have the answer to that, Allison?
I'm sorry, I was reading.
The question was, how many months has production been below 1 million a day? And I think that we were there 3 months.
I'm pretty sure it was November. I looked it up before.
That's what I thought.
Justin said it.
Justin has it. Oh, August and September it went below 1 million, and then in December and January it fell below 1 million again. So there again, like I'm talking about. So August and September we had a dip down to 970,000. We went back above 1 million, then we fell to 940 and 980, and now we're back above 1 million again. So we're doing that roller coaster ride, and like I said, I really think realistically we could expect to get back down into the mid to upper 900s before it really turns around in May and June.
Could you talk at all on if you know about if companies are finding enough employees to keep up with hiring activities this summer?
Yeah, great question. And the answer to that would be no, they are not. There are job fairs being hosted, not just in the oil cities of Dickinson and Williston, but they're actually hosting some job fairs in some South Dakota towns, Aberdeen and Rapid City, and over into Minnesota. The anticipated pickup in activity to get to 55 drilling rigs and 25 frac crews means they got to hire 2,000 people. And the first 1,000 came relatively easy, but they are definitely struggling to find that second 1,000 people. And some of that is because the Permian Basin picked up a few months earlier, and so the highly qualified people went there to work in the oil patch. So we're probably looking for 1,000 employees in Williston, Dickinson, and Minot, Stanley to fill the needs.
So moving forward, when we get back up to staying above 1 million barrels per day and oil, like the production in the Bakken intensifies, finding these employees is going to be a challenge then, like having enough staff to work on the rigs and practices?
Sure. Yeah. So the question was, is that going to be a long-term challenge? And it certainly looks like it. The last time that Bakken production was booming and activity was booming, the rest of the country was in recession. And so it was relatively easy to get truck drivers to move here from Florida and Idaho and all over the country. But that is no longer the case. There are not very many places in the U.S. where there's a recession taking place and where there are people that need to get up and move. Now, the people that man the drilling rigs, they tend to just go where the drilling rigs are. They're a bit like gypsies, and they follow the drilling rigs. But frac crews, production employees are going to be hard to find. The industry has been working on kind of a advertising program, if you would have it, and is planning to roll something out here within the next month or two with Job Service North Dakota about what has changed from the last time. So as you recall, the last time in 12 and 13, people came here and there was no place to live. There was no place to recreate. The schools were overcrowded. And so what they want to do is promote all the things that have changed. There are vacant apartments. There are new recreation facilities in western North Dakota towns. The schools have been expanded, and beautiful new schools in places like Watford City and Dickinson and Williston. So there's a campaign being prepared to try to deal with that. But long term, it's going to be a challenge.
Is the state going to do anything to help promote the area to attract those employees?
Absolutely. The question was, is the state going to do anything to help? And the tourism department is involved in this, as is Job Service North Dakota, along with industry. So we want to really promote what has happened in the state, where the money has been invested to make it a great place to move to. And I know some young folks that have experienced just that. I know a young man that came here during the first boom to work on a frac crew, and he had to live in someone's basement when he was here. He went away and got married and still didn't find great employment. And this time when he came back to work on a frac crew, he and his new wife had an apartment to rent, an affordable apartment. So there's some really positive things that can come out of this.
Could you just clarify a question, an answer that you gave about the Permian and Dakota Access?
Yeah.
I'm trying to decipher it myself, but...
Well, let me just repeat it, and we'll try. We'll go from there.
North Dakota is now cheaper for taxes and royalties than Texas, and with DAPL, transportation will be equal, so there'll be more of a level playing field between...
That was the end result. Okay. North Dakota has higher taxes, lower royalty rates, and prior to DAPL had higher transportation costs. So North Dakota was, prior to DAPL, a high-cost state, but significantly higher than the Permian. But with the Dakota Access Pipeline, this CEO has evaluated the prospects of investment in the Permian versus the Bakken and determined that it's a level playing field now, that we still have higher taxes, but we have lower royalty rates, and Dakota Access has lowered the transportation costs to even everything out.
Do you think there'll be any issues in terms of Stanley and Tioga? This is getting a little on the fringe, but in terms of housing your Stanley and Tioga to bring in all these new employees?
You know, some of the towns are better prepared than others, and so I think Stanley hasn't built much new housing recently. Tioga, I believe, has a little bit of vacant housing, but the places where there's really housing available are Dickinson, Williston, and Watford City. Those three places have continued to invest even during the downturn in housing. And so with a not too long a commute, I mean, when you think about commuting from Williston to Stanley, it seems like a long ways, or Watford City to Newtown, but we also built bypasses around all those towns.
Yep.
So we cleared the traffic backlog and got the traffic moving, and along with that, at least in those three towns, there's quite a bit of vacant or available housing.
Okay. Alyssa, go ahead.
If you could just reiterate what the importance is of hitting this 1 million barrels a day means for North Dakota oil industry.
Sure, and you know, the 1 million barrel a day, I was asked to reiterate, what does that mean? And 1 million barrels a day is a big psychological mark on top of everything else. I mean, when you look at being above 1 million barrels a day, that generates a lot of state revenue. It drives a big part of the economics of North Dakota, and psychologically, it's a huge positive sign. The royalty owners will have money to spend. The workers are coming back, and they love to spend money. The industry will be making capital investments, and the state will have revenue to put into infrastructure and social programs and things like that. So it isn't just psychological. There's a big difference between 900,000 barrels a day and 1 million barrels a day in terms of the revenue and the capital investment and the employees.
Last question here from the webinar. If output does fall to around 950,000 barrels a day around March or April, do you have an expectation as far as when it would get back up above 1 million?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm expecting late third quarter, early fourth quarter for sure. And what, sometimes I get big surprises, like February being up 50,000 barrels a day. I thought it could have been up a little bit, but yeah, it could come faster. And some of these companies have surprised me. One of our major oil and gas operators initially was talking maybe running a 3 or 4 rig program. And then as the first of the year got here, they started talking about a 6 rig program. They have 10 rigs running. And they've been doing some refracs, and they had great success on the first one that's been reported to us. And so now I've opened another door of interest, and we'll talk about that later. But so some of the companies, as oil prices have remained firm and opportunities have arisen and the capital has been there, or the cash flow has been there, they've way exceeded their 2017 plans.
Technically, there's 3 minutes left, so if you just want to give just a broad overview of what opened the door on refrac, you're more than welcome to. with that being the very last question.
Sure. Well, the reason I know about this is North Dakota has something that's unique, the Oil and Gas Research Council. And so one of the operators, our biggest operator in the state, has a lot of wells that were drilled prior to 2010. They were very few frac stages, if staged at all. A lot of them were a single stage frac job. And so they approached the Oil and Gas Research Council to fund 50% of a refracture project. And they performed the refracture job on the first well that we have the report on, using some new technology. They used coil tubing to go in and add perforations and change the spacing within the well. They used brand new diverter agents. They used something called microproppant, and they used the large volume frac jobs that have become the trademark of the Bakken. The end result was a 5-fold increase in production, and a lower gas oil ratio and a change in the water oil ratio, which means they absolutely contacted new rock. And not only did the production go up 5-fold, but it has stayed that high for months. So there's a lot of excitement around the new technology. There were probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 8,000 wells drilled before they really figured out how to do lots of stages and hydraulically fracture these wells. So there's a lot of potential wells that could be done to without really adding anything to the footprint of the oil patch.
Okay, well, for everyone on the call, I sent you all a link to the Oil and Gas Research Council's website. So if you're interested in looking up that project, you can go to their website. And with that, we'll switch over to Mr. Kringstad. For those of you in the audience, if you'd like it, I can give it to you when we're done.
It's on.
Is it? Okay.
It's just
Hey, perfect.
Okay, Mr. Kringstad, you're up. Fire away.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Kringstad, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We'll get right in with the update of production from the neighboring states that share the same transportation infrastructure. Eastern Montana, South Dakota, tough to see the trend here, but continued slides in production in both states. Currently 0 drilling rigs operating in either one of the 2 neighboring states, with all the activity right now still focused in North Dakota. And then just a quick snapshot back to 2016. So December of 2016 was the first time that the region as a whole dropped below that 1 million barrels a day threshold, but as you noticed in the previous slide, we're now back above that 1 million barrels a day for the region as a whole. When we take a look at transportation dynamics for crude out of the region, we are continuing to see some additional shifts where some additional pipeline utilization versus rail. You'll notice on the slide 5, taking a look, those imports, exports, the green line that you see at the bottom of the screen, those continue to be higher than usual. The amount of crude that's being trucked north into Canada, getting onto a Canadian pipeline system there. Some conversations with some folks that, there were some concerns on my end that maybe some of the data was not coming in accurately from the federal government, but some conversations with folks are that is accurate, that there is some higher volumes being trucked north for some marketing purposes, where it then enters again the Canadian pipeline system just north of the border. And so crude by rail has been staying fairly steady, just shy of that 300,000 barrels of oil per day out of the region. So the growth that we had seen was either finding excess pipeline capacity that was in existence or being trucked north up into Canada in the meantime. Slide 7 takes a look at the rail dynamics. This is 1 month behind the current production month that we're looking at, but this is from January. You'll see again some pretty sharp movements between east and west coast crude by rail movements out of the region. Again, that is just market dynamics at work, where the producers are able to have the most advantageous pricing situations. That is one of the advantages that folks and shippers have liked about rail, is that they are able to have some flexibility as far as where those barrels get moved, depending upon what the market's doing almost at any given time. Slide 8 takes a look at what the pricing at the different refining regions of the U.S. is doing in January. Again, we continue to see the east and west coast having the highest priced markets, followed up by the Gulf, and then PADD 2, which is the Midwest. Slide 9, a little bit of an upgrade from what you guys have seen in previous monthly production updates from myself. You'll notice the Brent and Cushing prices from today are on there. You'll also notice a new pricing down in the Gulf Coast, and this is the CME Louisiana Light Sweet crude, basically the premium, or if it was at a discount, you'd see the discount there. But right now, at LLS is trading just above $2 higher than what WTI is trading for in the Cushing market. And the reason I've added that, once Dakota Access is in full service and those Bakken barrels are making their way to the Gulf Coast, there's a lot of consensus that the Bakken barrel is going to be competing with an LLS on a pricing, price comparison. And so folks that are interested to know, what type of price advantage there may be for a Bakken barrel getting to the Gulf Coast, this is probably the best indicator that we have at this time. So again, LLS as of today was around $2 plus to the WTI pricing. And so we'll keep an eye on that as things continue to progress. And then just slide 10, just the background data for the truck imports, exports out of the region. So again, continued very high export numbers, as well as some moderate import volumes coming in as well. So again, as those trucks leave North Dakota, they may be carrying back some additional crude for other blending and marketing purposes in the state of North Dakota. On the flaring update, again, down a couple percentage points from the last month. Those points have been shaved off of that orange piece of the pie. So again, wells that were connected, but they just didn't have enough space. And so as the gas gathering industry continues to add compression, get some loops in there, which means adding secondary pipelines alongside the originals. Those are some of the steps that they're taking in order to address that orange piece of the pie. Slide 12 takes a look at, again, historical challenges with natural gas flaring. You'll see the blue piece of the pie, wells that are not connected, that continues to stay relatively stable. It's that flaring that from the connected wells that the industry is continuing to work forward, trying to, again, maximize the operational efficiencies of their gathering systems, compressor stations, everything else that's operated in order to get all of that gas from the wellhead to one of their processing plants. And slide 13, just an update on well connections for gas gathering. The black line is the wells that are getting connected in a given month. The red line is the number of new producing wells producing gas. And so it's a good sign when that black line is at least equal or higher than that red line, and we're continuing to see that the gas gathering pace is continuing to stay at least with, or in this case for February, stay above the drilling pace in western North Dakota. And then just bumping ahead a couple slides, just an update on natural gas liquids production. This is from January, the most recent data set available. Because we saw that big decrease in gas production in January, in turn, the natural gas liquids production was down as well. But as we see February and some of the growth now coming out of winter into spring and summer, these natural gas liquids volumes are going to continue to grow. And again, finding a transportation method for those, either by pipeline, truck, or by rail out of the region, is going to continue to be one of the big issues that the Pipeline Authority is going to continue to watch and stay on top of.
Can you go back to the percent flared from wells connected? Can you explain again what those challenges are?
Yeah, and so the gas flaring, as you see on slide 11, the pie chart that I use there, on that blue piece of the pie, those are wells that simply there is no pipeline connection to them. They're flaring because a pipeline or a sales option does not exist. The orange piece of the pie, those are wells that have a pipeline connection, but for one reason or another, that pipeline does not have enough space in a given month to move all of the gas that's being produced. And so some of the gas gets put into the sale line, some of the gas gets diverted to the flare pit. And so some of the challenges there, that the pipeline may have been undersized for many different reasons. It may have been an older line that they weren't anticipating the number of wells on a pad. They weren't anticipating the production levels that the wells are performing at now. So the solutions for that from the midstream industry is, in some cases, looping, which means putting another pipeline alongside the original, adding compression to their pipeline system so that they can use some more horsepower to force more gas through the pipeline, and then just staying on top of maintenance of the lines. And so in North Dakota, our gas is very rich, and natural gas liquids tend to accumulate, basically pool in the bottom of the pipeline systems. And so if a company is not diligent about sending through pigs to clean out liquids, their gas gathering lines can become choked by liquids that settle out in the pipeline. So there's a few different steps that companies are taking to try and make sure that their systems are operating as efficiently as they can.
I have a question for you. Okay, so you have the percentages at 60% for pipelines, 25% for rail. Yeah, back on one of those early slides there. So with Dakota Access coming online, how much do you expect those percentages to shift? And then when can we expect to see that? Is that going to be like a pretty immediate shift or a gradual shift?
And so the question, so the pie chart, kind of the transportation breakdown, what happens when Dakota Access goes into service and in its full service? Will it be immediate? Will it be a buildup? It'll likely be pretty noticeable. And so we're still in the February time frame. We're hearing more and more activity now. When April rolls around, when May rolls around, we start seeing more crude being used for line fill and then full operational service. These numbers will definitely shift. And so I have not tried to put a hard percentage on, exactly what rail is going to do versus pipeline when that system's in place, but there will be a significant shift. We will see barrels taken off of the rail lines and put into the pipeline network. And I do anticipate it will likely only take a month or two before we see some real significant changes.
Do you know how much oil is going to ship in DAPL initially?
I don't. So all their shipper commitments and the scheduling of those volumes, that's all held confidential by the company. So I don't know, from day one, what shippers have certain volumes committed. Do they have kind of a buildup of their commitments? And so it really depends on what type of contracts they had negotiated with their shippers.
Are there any major gas pipeline projects now underway to either extend services to whole communities or specifically to new large industries that use propane?
So this is switching gears now, I guess, completely to natural gas distribution and service. And so not necessarily talking about what's taking place in western North Dakota. This is gas that's been processed and is the consumer quality gas. And so the one major project that is underway is over in eastern North Dakota, which would connect the Viking system just across the border in western Minnesota to the WBI pipeline system in eastern North Dakota. And so that line would bring additional, I think I do have a map of that. Yep, so exactly, slide 14. You can see the Viking line, and you can see in purple the WBI transmission line, which ends just west of the city of Fargo. And so they will then connect the Viking pipeline system with the WBI system in order to add some additional capacity to eastern North Dakota for additional industries, communities that may desire to have access to that. So right now, that's the big system that's underway. As far as in the future, I know these companies are very aggressive at looking at new opportunities, looking for new customers, and so they're continually working with either communities or industries to see if there's a way to get additional gas service to areas that currently don't have it.
You talked for a couple of months about more oil being trucked up to Canada for marketing reasons. What are those marketing reasons?
Yes, so slide 10. For those on the webinar, what are some of the reasons that crude oil may be shipped either north or even south into North Dakota? And so companies, depending upon the specs of various crude oils, each crude grade is going to have a different price value, and there are ways that companies may use one specific grade of crude oil, blend it with another grade of crude oil to create what they see as a higher value product than the two components that were used in it. So again, depending upon what markets are doing in specific time frames, either north of the border, south of the border, there may be advantages for companies to do some type of blending operations in order to maximize profit.
Do you happen to know in Canada, are they blending Bakken crude with like Alberta tar sands crude, or do you happen to know what they're doing up there?
I don't have any of the specific details because that's typically those marketers don't share a lot of that information just because of more competitive reasons. It's likely just blending between Williston Basin crudes, so not necessarily further west Alberta crudes coming down any major pipeline system, but likely blending between different formations north of the border and then formations in production in North Dakota.
Okay. Doesn't look like we have any more questions in the conference room, and that looks like it's it from the webinar. So with that, we will wrap the April webinar. So thanks for joining us, everyone.